Yes, so hello again. Welcome to the Hats of the 20th Century, Hats and More, a museum. And we were trying to get through the 1910 decade of the hats that I do in the shows that I used to take on the road. We had gotten to just the last few, so I've decided we're going to start in again, do those, and then maybe fill out the show by doing some that are up in the display area that were never in my shows. But I always have to go back to make a few corrections of what I didn't say quite right in the other offerings we've made today. And one of them was just a small thing. It didn't mean much, but I was talking about the hobble skirts, and I showed a postcard photo. It isn't the postcard because I'm waiting for that to come in the mail, but a photo of the postcard I ordered. And what I wanted to say about hobble skirts was that men used to jokingly call them speed limit skirts. I had accidentally said time limit skirts. Speed limit skirts, meaning the gals sure could go very fast. So that was one thing I needed to correct. I also wanted to be sure that on the willow plume business that I mentioned that the ad promised you, this is where you tie on lengths from other plumes to make big long willow plumes. The ad, which I could, well, I'll just hold this one. The ad promised that it would be a cost that pleases you. I wanted you to see a real good, steady picture of that ad. Can you get the whole ad? I keep wiggling it. Darn it. There we go. It's really interesting when you read it. All hand-tied knots at a very low cost. There you go. That should do it. So that was a better shot at the ad for willow plumes. And that's not the only ad I've seen. That's just the best ad I've seen for the willow plumes. And then I wanted to mention on the Fisk hat that we talked about, it said in there 1907, and unless you can get a really good shot of it, you'd have to take my word for it. Can you see 1907? There. Okay. Because that doesn't happen very often. That's really amazing. And I think the only other time I've seen that happen was in the 30s, where they actually had the date on the label. And the Fisk Company, I said that was a company that had been around since 1853, and you know that because when you buy their hats, it's right there on the box. And I may as well mention here that the company lasted about 100 years because in the 50s, when all things changed with hat wearing, the Fisk Company did eventually fold, and that was the end of the Fisk hats. I said that this is a wool felt, a furry wool felt. And I bet you wondered, why do I think that? Well, I'm going to show you, because here up on the display, whoops, I brought it down. This is another hat that is a beaver felt. And I'm thinking you can see the difference. Beaver felt, wool, furry wool felt. Can you see a difference? Yeah. And the feel. The feel, this is just like petting a cat. And this is just furry. So anyway, I wanted to make a little better explanation of that. You know, I'm going to try this one on her also since I have it down. It's got a sizing band on just the front, I would say. There's no lining, so I really don't know what the situation, but that just about has to be the front, the way it looks on her. Beautiful, stylish little beaver hat from the early part of the century. Okay, and the Fisk didn't have it. Let's go with this one to talk better about. This is the hat that was old new, never got used, still had its tag of $1.75 on it. Maybe you need to get a better picture of that for a change. Maybe it's too white, too bright. There we go. Well, anyway, it says $1.75, and that's why I bought it. But inside, our lining has fallen out, has the lady's little bow. We talked about how only men's hats have little bows in the back of them, but right now, we're starting to see ladies' hats that also have a little bow, where the gathered in the center lining opened up and to a flat piece, and that little bow is right where you would have tied off the gathered in the center lining, like a hat I have over here that really did do that. This one really did do it. in all seriousness, it gathered in the center lining, tied off to a little bow, okay? Well, I didn't continue to mention that that doesn't last very long. It was a nice tribute to ladies' hats to have the little ornamental survival. And I'm going to put this one on because it didn't really get much attention. And it didn't last very long because the linings in ladies' hats just change so often. And by the mid to definitely late 20s, ladies' hats won't even have linings. So there will be no place for a little gathered in the center bow as a memorial. Okay, now I think we're up to what I think I didn't tell you right, and I'm going to start again on this hat. We talked about the suffragette movement and how they were winning their rights for women's vote after a long battle, and yet there was a bigger battle going on in the world called World War I, and this hat was there to see it. Variations of this hat, called a Montana Peak, had been worn by ranchers, cowboys, and cavalry scouts. But in 1911, the Army adopted this as its official hat, 1911. And in World War I, this was known as the campaign hat. And I could say that my grandpa was one of the doughboys over there. Over there. In 1917 and 1918. That's the years that our fellows was over there. That was my grandfather, and he was a doughboy. And I often wondered why they were called doughboys. And I kept trying to do research and asking people that ought to know, and I tell you, I came up with so many goofy reasons why they were called doughboys. I finally decided no one knows. So, but a few of them, very briefly, one reason was that it refers to the undercooked bread that they would cook when out in the field by campfire. More like dough than real bread, so that was doughboys. Another reason was the buttons on their uniform, which I don't notice to be the case, but they said looked like little balls of dough. Okay, that seems silly. And another one was that the Salvation Army always sat up to hand out donuts to the troop trains as they came through town and stopped briefly. So there's another reason. I just wished, being a young child, I would have known that I should have asked my grandpa, because grandpa would have known why he was called a doughboy. Well, anyway, this type of hat went on to be used for forest rangers, state troopers, Marines, Boy Scouts, and you can probably think of a lot of other reasons. A hat of many hats, as it was said. It's got a very crispy, crunchy old lining and shoestring ties, which I kind of started to worry that meant it was older than World War I. But I notice on the sheet music, over there, send the word to beware, the Yanks are coming. Well, anyway, you know the song by George M. Cohan. I noticed the shoestring coming out of his hat. So I think, I think it is really a World War I hat. There they go. There's some soldiers. And there again, wouldn't it have been wonderful if I could have had Grandpa's hat? My gosh. Well, speaking of World War I found out that this kerchief that I have is not just a huge handkerchief, but honestly, it was a nurse's kerchief. So now we're going to take this cute little Z back off of her. One more look at that. Such a precious hat. Anyway, a kerchief, even in the dictionary, says that it is a square piece of fabric worn on a lady's head. A kerchief. So this is what the nurses wore, among maybe other things. And I'll see if I can put it on her right without having to use bobby pins. I'm going to just bring it over and flap it down. And bring it over. Sometimes this works out pretty successfully. Well, that's pretty good, without the bobby pins to hold it secure. So there is a kerchief, like the nurses wore in World War I. Am I messing it up? There we go. Now, a kerchief, as we said, is a lady's head covering, not to be confused with a handkerchief, as this is just an example of one. An old one with a hole in it and some nice tatting around the edges. Handkerchiefs were very popular forever until Kleenex came and took all of that away. Women used to have those in their purses. Okay, so now let's see. I think we're down to our very last hat. You bet. Okay, the one on the corner here looks as though she could have been, maybe I'll just walk out there. I'll get her out of her perch. There we go. Looks like a flapper from the Roaring Twenties. But truthfully, these feather spiked bandeaus were a product of the teen years. And I wonder if anybody has heard of Vernon and Irene Castle. They were a young dancing duo, ballroom dancing. I don't think we said that, so we have no idea. You gotta tell me when I'm on time, okay? Irene and Vernon Castle were a young ballroom dancing duo at this time, and very popular. Here's some things in my book about Irene and Vernon. They had a way of ballroom dancing that just caught everybody's attention. They had a castle walk. On the other page is her designs of some good dancing dresses. So in this 1910 decade, Irene and Vernon Castle were a very big deal. And she threw off her corsets, bobbed her hair, wore a bandeau, and would put a feather spiking in it. This one isn't much of a spike, but it's a feather coming out of a bandeau. So she helped perpetuate this idea, which was kind of catching on. Anyway, they were catapulted to fame in this decade, and sadly it all ended very abruptly with Vernon's death in World War I. A young man with a big future, and now he was lost. Very sad. I think I even had it here. In 1939, Fred Astaire and who's the one he dances with? Ginger Rogers. Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers did a movie of their life in 1939. Now, I know you've heard of those two, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers. So honestly, I think this is the end of it. This is the hats I used to take in my program, and I would at this point tell you that that's the first 2 decades of the 20th century, but it's just the tip of the iceberg. There's hundreds of hats in this building, in fact, from the 20s, 30s, 40s, and beyond until we get up to 2000. And I'd love to show you all of them. So we will put all of these away and start in again. But before we do that, starting with the 20s, we will look at this display of things, clothing and items from the first 2 decades of the 20th century. So I'm going to ask you how much time we have right now.
1337.
That's what we're at? Oh boy. Well, let's start with this. Maybe we'll get the ones on the racks done. This isn't a beret as much as it is a tam. And I've already had it down and looked inside. It's got the old black lining, so it is definitely an old hat made of sealskin fur. Soft as butter. Even softer, actually. Here's a cape of the same fur. Even softer than your beaver fur felt. It is really something. So that is a very stylish thing at this time. And, knocking things down, here's another hat from this time period. Has the old black lining. I'm going to try it on her. I would say we call these toques, but I don't know. This is such a strange thing. But it didn't cost me much, so I bought it. But it does put you in mind a little bit of that cake. Only maybe just one layer. Brown velvet, old Braden design around it. And there's a band coming down. You might see it on her forehead. So that you could put a hat pin through the back to hold it on your head. Now this really isn't anything I need to bring down. Maybe I'll just grab the head. It's just another example of what a suffragette might have worn. And I've had it down. It has the same black lining. This one seems to be a wool furry felt. I have quite a few of those. Enough to get the point across for sure. We talked about toque, so I'm going to bring over this toque. Since we're talking about hats. Because this is a cutie pie. Post-it notes to my foot. Okay, got black paper in there so that the hat stand didn't hurt it in any way. But it's got a black lining, kind of a tattered and used black lining. And being a brimless hat, it's called a toque. It has a willow plume too. In fact, it's so long and I can feel the knots. When you come down each strand, and actually these strands are called barbs, so there you go. A willow plume on top of a toque. A very teen-looking hat. I mean from the teen period. It's a sweetie pie. 2 glass buttons in the front. What else have we got here? Well, I have another, can you make it through? I have another cake type hat. Same thing exactly. Gather center lining, a band to put the hat pin through. Horsehair lace. This one we saw, a brown beaver fur, soft, that one we saw already. I've hung it back up. Another one that a suffragette might have worn. It's in really tough shape. This is a cutie pie. Now I'm going to have you just turn around when I get done showing the inside. This is a cutie pie hanging here, and it's got actually glass. When I tap it to my teeth, did you see me do that? Yeah, I can tell that it is glass. I'll set that back up there. And put it on Shelly. My models on either end are named for my cousins, Bertie and Shelly. Anyway, isn't that a cutie? With a cocked hat in the front, a plume, some ornaments. It's just a very nice hat. But see, these I bought later, so I didn't actually have them in my show. Oh, I'm wearing the toque. Now I'm going to see, where are we at on time?
17.
Oh boy, I'm going to try to hurry and get this one other one. Maybe if I went over here. I have a pool cue with a doorknob on the top that someone used for a cane. This is not easy to get off of here. But being a lady's hat, I'm going to try. And it's kind of nice. Stay there. Gathering the center lining. The usual fare. Lots of fluffy plumes. And I must say, this building does not get dusty. There might be a little dust on it, but nothing bad. It's been hanging up there for